Welcome to Jitasa University, where our goal is to empower nonprofits through free educational content. These short videos are all provided by trusted partners within our network as well, so each topic will be relevant to every organization, regardless of size. Let's dive right in. This month, we're featuring Lauren, co-founder of Social Impact Solutions, whose mission is to give nonprofits access to the best marketing and impact resources to help them communicate their value, accelerate their fundraising, and expand their reach. Let's pass things over to Lauren and get started with the content.
Wonderful. Alex, thank you so much for the introduction. Jitasa, thank you so much for your partnership and for having me here today. My name is Lauren Vanderpool. I'm a co-founder of Social Impact Solutions, and I'm really excited to talk today about how nonprofits can increase funding by measuring the outcomes of their programs. So lots of organizations, lots of nonprofits want to communicate impact, but we see a lot of organizations struggle to actually measure the impact that needs to be captured before being able to communicate it. And so we know that nonprofits are under a lot of pressure right now, particularly with funding cuts, executive orders, and lots of unknowns and uncertainty over the last few months. And so we felt like this was a really valuable topic for nonprofit leaders. So let's dive right in and talk about why impact measurement is so critically important. We have some stats here on this slide that highlight that 97% of major donors say that the number one reason they give to an organization is based on the impact it creates. 2 out of 3 funders say that they care about positive outcomes, so not just the outputs, and we'll talk about this in a few slides, but the true change, the outcomes that your organization and your programs are creating. And then we also see this with younger generations as well. So millennials and Gen Z care a lot about being able to quantify the social and economic impact of nonprofit organizations and their programs. So some pretty reliable and powerful statistics here that help us see why measuring impact is so important. In addition to this, we see that nonprofits that do measure their impact, that have sound impact data and can communicate the outcomes or the true change of their programs, they outperform others when funding is cut, when the landscape is unsteady and uncertain, and when things get more competitive from a funding perspective. So now is definitely a time that organizations are feeling that, and a time to lean into impact measurement more than ever. So again, just to reiterate some pieces of why impact measurement is so important and why being able to communicate the outcomes of your programs is really vital. This establishes a lot of trust and transparency with donors and other stakeholders. This in turn absolutely increases donor engagement. It helps you communicate your value or your impact much more clearly. This improves marketing and fundraising efforts. And it also helps your internal team make more informed, data-driven decisions that leads to improved programs and better serving your constituents or beneficiaries, the people in your community that you serve. So at Social Impact Solutions, we have surveyed over 1,200 nonprofit leaders, and here are just a few insights of what we've learned. Of those 1,200 that have responded to our survey, about 70% say that they do not have a theory of change. We'll talk about this in a few slides, but a theory of change is a really great starting point for impact measurement. So we hate to see that so many organizations don't have a theory of change, but this is a good starting point, and we'll talk through some of those components today. 56% of those who have taken our survey say that they struggle to communicate their impact, particularly in a fundraising format. So we'll talk about that as well. And so we've also seen that 55% say that they're not confident in the impact they're creating through their organization. So capturing impact data, knowing the outcomes of your programs can definitely increase confidence internally for you as a nonprofit leader, for of your team, as well as for volunteers, donors, board members, and other stakeholders as well. So based on these survey results, we want to help nonprofit leaders create a theory of change and a logic model, create and develop measurable goals and objectives so that you can better track the outcomes of your programs over time, and consistently capture reliable impact data. So we'll talk about all three of these pieces in our upcoming slides. So let's dive in and talk about creating a theory of change and a logic model, and how this can be a valuable first step for your impact measurement efforts, and how this is going to help you determine the outcomes of your programs, ultimately improve your programs, and increase funding. So a theory of change, if you don't have one, or if it's been a while since your organization has updated a theory of change, this is a standard document that should really help your entire organization, everyone on your team, better understand the change that your organization aims to create. So these should be big, long-term goals. This has not been accomplished yet, but it helps you and your team understand the change that you wish to create and how you're going to get there. So talking about long-term goals and sort of reverse engineering that to where you're looking at long-term, where do we want to go? But then reverse engineering and looking at short-term, mid-term, how are we going to get there? So a theory of change can outline practical steps that your team is taking and will continue to take to get to that intended change. Another important piece that's very much related to a theory of change is a logic model. I personally like to start with a logic model and do this exercise first, and then go into the more narrative or paragraph style theory of change. So a logic model is typically in more of a table or chart or spreadsheet form. It looks at inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and long-term impacts for each of your programs. And this is where it really helps you, your team, even board members really understand what each program is aiming to do, what's required to keep these programs up and running on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. For outputs, maybe looking at how many people you serve. For outcomes, looking at the true change being created from pre to post program. And then long-term impacts, how is this actually changing or impacting your greater community? So just quickly, let's define impact. Impact, when our team is talking about impact, we're talking about measuring change over time. So helping you understand the change that your programs are creating, not just the outputs, but the true outcomes and long-term impacts that you and your organization and your programs are creating for the community that you serve. A lot of nonprofits have output metrics, and they oftentimes stop here. So outputs are really important, really critical, but we absolutely want to see you move on to outcomes, and we'll talk about that next. Outputs might be the number of people you've served, number of trees planted, number of school supplies distributed, number of volunteer hours that have been donated, if you will. These are all really important metrics. Outputs matter a lot. They're great starting points. But this doesn't really tell you or donors the change that's being created. So we absolutely want to go on to outcomes, which is what we see here on this slide. This is where you start to see more change. So from beginning to end of program, what change is being created for the people that you serve? If you're focused on healthcare or nutrition, you might start to see improved health status among patients or the population that you serve. If you're focused on job training skills, you might start to see shifts in the local economy. If you're focused on education, then you might start to see higher pass rates or higher graduation rates among students. More for advocacy and awareness and policy groups, you might start to see improvement in the local justice system. These are all examples of outcomes, things that are actually leading to real tangible change for individuals, families, and broader communities. This is a simplified logic model here on this slide. And so looking at outputs versus outcomes versus impact. And so I'll just, for the sake of time, focus on this middle option here. So if we're looking at a food distribution program, an example of an output might be that 250,000 meals have been given away. An example outcome might be that on average, undernourished children in the program are gaining a kilogram per month. Again, these are undernourished children, so you do want them to gain weight, but probably not for too long. So that's a good short or midterm outcome. And then over here, if we look at long-term impact, maybe you start to see a 20% decrease in malnutrition in the community you're serving over the next 3 years. So these are just examples of what outputs, outcomes, and long-term impacts can look like for different programs within your organization. So that was a quick overview of theory of change and logic model, but if your organization is just getting started with impact measurement, definitely start there. Let's now dive into developing measurable goals and objectives specifically for program outcomes. So goals and objectives should absolutely be aligned with your theory of change and your logic model. And we really like to use a SMART goal framework to ensure that these are measurable. SMART goals, SMART objectives are really helpful in keeping things tangible, measurable, and achievable. So an example framework here, these are widely used. We did not come up with these frameworks, but who will do what, resulting in measure by when. So when we put all this together, a SMART goal might look like organization ABC will build 125 new homes in North Tulsa, resulting in a 15% decrease in homelessness by December 31st of 2025. So this is just an example of what a SMART goal can look like. You can see that it's very measurable, it's time-bound, and hopefully it's also realistic for your organization to achieve this in this allotted amount of time. Another example of a SMART goal here is just changing the order, shifting the order a little bit. By when, who will do what, resulting in measure. So by March 31st, 2026, organization ABC will triple the reach of its diabetes prevention program, resulting in a 25% reduction in obesity among its patient population. So these are just some examples. You can find other SMART goal or SMART objective frameworks online, but these are very straightforward, very measurable, and again, these should very much be in alignment with your theory of change and your logic model. So all types of funders, and I would even say stakeholders of all types, want to know the impact that you're creating. They also want to know the impact that they are helping you create. But it's really hard to measure your impact. It's really hard to know the true outcomes of your programs when you don't have a theory of change or logic model in place, and particularly when you don't have measurable goals and objectives in place for your programs. So having these measurable goals and objectives, they help your internal team set targets to reach and track if you're meeting those objectives and goals and KPIs. It also helps your team look at progress over time and determine what's working well for your programs, what can be improved upon, and how can you better serve the individuals or families or community at large. And then this also gives you data on ideally a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis that you can in real time report back to your internal team. You can also report it back to external stakeholders, whether that's board members, volunteers, donors, corporate partners. It gives you real-time data that can help you raise more money, communicate your impact more clearly, but also helps your team know what's going on internally, and you can modify and update your processes in real time rather than waiting on, a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month lag or delay when this data is not really captured at all, or it's, at least not analyzed in real time. So let's move on and talk about how and why you should capture impact data on a consistent basis and not just once or twice a year. So as we've talked about, measuring impact consistently and over the long term is really critical for nonprofit growth, but lots of funders, whether that's individual donors, granting organizations, family foundations, corporate partners, all types of donors are at best requesting impact data, and many of them are requiring impact data in order to fund you a single time and certainly to give year over year. So capturing reliable impact data on a consistent basis will help you determine your outputs and your outcomes. So a lot of that information that funders are requesting can be provided by capturing impact data consistently. You can then start to measure and calculate dollar per output, dollar per outcome, and these pieces of information many funders also want to know. Again, this helps you measure progress over time, report on this information on a monthly, quarterly, or at least an annual basis, and in real time, make adjustments to improve your programs and better serve your community. An analogy that we like to use is a heart rate monitor. And so we all know that there are various levels or types of heart rate monitors, that some are more reliable than others, but cost is usually a factor in that as well. And so you can take your pulse manually, just with your hand at your wrist or your neck. And so we like to make the manual heart rate monitor. We say that that's the same thing as doing maybe paper surveys. So it works, you get fine information, but it's time consuming, and your data can be forgotten or lost. So we don't like to advocate that you use paper surveys. Ideally, you're starting to use digital systems. Maybe you have a $10 watch that measures your heart rate, but it's not super accurate or reliable. But that's okay. At least, you're not having to memorize your heart rate or your pulse in your head as if you were doing it manually. So a lot of organizations start with maybe that $10 watch option or a $100 watch option, and then start to upgrade as their organization is ready for it, as you have the budget, as your organization grows. But ideally, using a digitized impact measurement system, even if it is at this $10 watch range, digitized data is always going to be better than paper surveys, with a few rare exceptions. So some tools that we see used often and that we advocate for often are SurveyMonkey. So again, keeping your data digital, but a really simple system. It's not the most sophisticated option out there, but it does work well. SurveyMonkey is a good option. Kobo Toolbox is another one that we see a lot. They have free and paid options for qualitative and quantitative data. Sure Impact and SoPact are some others that we see used that can be really great for impact measurement. And then on a more robust standpoint, Salesforce and Tableau can be great. Usually it is going to be more expensive, going to take more training, but you can also do a lot more with those. So these are just some examples of digital impact data options that your team can use to capture data and be able to analyze it in real time. Oftentimes people have a hard time knowing what data to capture. And so again, going back to your theory of change and logic model, those measurable goals and objectives, those should work in tandem to give you a good idea of what you need to measure. And then once you have a good idea of that, using validated assessment tools is really, really key. A lot of organizations want to create their own surveys or their own assessment tools and make up their own questions. And what oftentimes happens with that is that these questions are created with a lot of bias. So just think if you or another team member created your own survey, you're really creating that from your own frame of mind, and we all have our own biases. That also leads to bias in how the questions are answered. So if you can find an existing external validated assessment tool, that's going to lead to a lot more reliable data over the long run. We typically look at, other universities or other institutions that have created these assessment tools from a research and evidence-based approach. So these are just some examples here of some that maybe a diabetes prevention program would use the Comprehensive Diabetes Assessment by Johns Hopkins University. Or we have another one here, that's the SF-12 Health Survey for Homeless Populations by the University of Chicago. And then a third one is an advocacy effectiveness analysis by the Casey Foundation. So these are just examples. Obviously, these tools need to be aligned with your programs, your mission, and what your organization is all about. But using a validated assessment tool, capturing that information through some type of digital platform, and making sure that these data points are aligned with your theory of change, your logic model, and measurable goals and objectives is a really great way to start getting reliable impact data that your team can use to communicate impact, use it in all of your marketing and fundraising efforts to prove the change that your organization is creating, to prove the outcomes of your programs. And that gives donors and funders a lot more confidence. It helps your organization be much more transparent, and ideally helps you secure more funding, even in times like this when funding is scarce and competitive, and there are lots of unknowns. So I hope that this has been really helpful. I know that we covered a lot of information in a pretty quick amount of time, but I would love to open up the floor for questions. Alex, I know you had some questions prepared that we were going to chat through here at the end, and would be happy to answer any of those.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Lots of great information in there. Yeah, there was a few questions that came up. The first one here is, are there any benchmarks or industry standards that should be used to evaluate whether outcomes are truly impactful?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Definitely a broad question. But yes, absolutely relying on and using industry standards and benchmarks. I would keep it specific to, whatever the industry is for your specific nonprofit. So if you are focused on maybe education or an after school program, then absolutely using industry standards to be able to measure increased knowledge from pre to post program, or increased pass rates, increased or improvement in grades, increased graduation rates. Those might all be great things to look at for an education program. For, let's see, say a job training program, if your nonprofit focuses on job skills and job training, then looking at, again, you could measure knowledge, you could measure confidence and self-efficacy. These are just examples. Obviously, organizations run the gamut on what their programs do, but using industry standards, whether those are local to your city or county, whether those are more statewide, national, or international metrics. Looking at, healthcare is another one that you can find lots of benchmarks, whether that's looking at, lab values or biometric values, blood pressure, BMI, using as much of those types of benchmarks that other people in the industry care about and are going to understand is absolutely really critical.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. And then I know you mentioned like the $10 watch. Do you have any other tips for like smaller teams with limited resources to start tracking outcomes more effectively?
Yeah, I think it depends on what systems you're already using. So there are lots of softwares and tools that integrate with one another. And so, I'm absolutely sticking within budget, but we see a lot of smaller organizations that start with SurveyMonkey, and that seems to work pretty well for them. It's not the most robust platform out there, but usually you can get enough qualitative and quantitative information through a platform like SurveyMonkey. Other organizations that are, just really don't have the budget, you can use Google Forms and have that pipe over into a spreadsheet. And so pros and cons with that, but that's, a cheaper option. Kobo Toolbox, like I mentioned, they do have free versions as well as paid versions. They also have offline capabilities if Wi-Fi is a concern for, remote access areas. But yeah, I think a lot of people usually think that paper surveys are going to be the easier option, the cheaper option, and it might be on the front end. It might be easier. You might even get more responses if you do paper surveys, but in the long run, it ends up taking up so much time that it's so much more costly for teams. Because if you get 50 or 100 or more paper survey responses, then who's going to manually enter those into a spreadsheet or a system? The room for error when you are entering that information is much higher. The odds of those surveys getting lost. So oftentimes, we get a lot of pushback on, well, we just need to do this via paper. And I've never seen a time that it works well on the back end. It's not that it can't be done, it's done all the time. It's just ideal to go ahead and spend a little bit more on some software and save everyone a lot of time in the long run.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. I think that's all the questions that came up, but yeah, I just want to thank you, Lauren, for taking your time today, and hope to have you and Social Impact Solutions on again in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thanks for watching. We hope you took away some valuable tips for measuring impact at your organization. If you had a question for the Social Impact Solutions team that that did not get answered or would like to chat, please feel free to reach out to them with the email on the screen. Also, take their free fundraising assessment with the QR code on the screen to help you advance your fundraising strategy. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.